The galaxy was vast, cold, and unforgiving. Humanity had spread across the stars like wildfire, colonizing planets and building outposts in every corner of known space. But now those same stars seemed to mock them. For years, humanity had been losing ground to an alien coalition called the Krylos Dominion. The Krylos were not just stronger. They were smarter, faster, and more ruthless than any human force could ever hope to match. They came without warning, striking hard and fast, leaving behind only ashes and despair. On a distant outpost named Epsilon 7, Captain Daniel Carter stood, on the edge of a crumbling barricade, his eyes scanning the horizon. The air was thick with tension, and the faint hum of energy weapons echoed in the distance. Behind him, Lieutenant Maria Lopez barked orders to the remaining soldiers, organizing what little defense they had left. The outpost was a mess, half of its structures reduced to rubble, the other half barely holding together. It wasn't much, but it was all that stood between the Krylos and Earth itself. Epsilon 7 was supposed to be a simple supply station, nothing more than a pit stop for passing ships. Now, it was a battleground, the last line of defense before the Krylos forces reached the inner colonies. If this outpost fell, there would be nothing stopping them from advancing further into human territory. Victory felt like a distant dream, something reserved for stories told around campfires rather than reality. Defeat loomed over everyone like a dark cloud, heavy and suffocating. Daniel sighed as he adjusted the strap of his rifle. He hated feeling powerless, but that's exactly how things were right now. His company had started with 200 men and women, all trained fighters ready to protect their home. Now, fewer than 50 remained. Some had died in battle. Others had succumbed to injuries or exhaustion. A few had simply disappeared, swallowed by the chaos of war. Every loss weighed heavily on Daniel's shoulders. He knew each name, each face, and every story behind them. These weren't just soldiers. They were people, friends, comrades. Maria approached him, her boots crunching against the dirt. She looked tired, her usually sharp features softened by fatigue. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, strands escaping here and there. "Sir," she said, her voice steady despite the weariness in her eyes. "We've fortified the eastern perimeter as best we can, but—" She hesitated, glancing at the horizon where flashes of light signaled another wave of enemies approaching. "But I don't think it'll hold." Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't need her to finish the sentence. They both knew what was coming. Another assault. Another desperate fight. Another round of losses. The Krylos never stopped. They didn't rest, didn't retreat, didn't negotiate. Their machines moved with mechanical precision. Their troops attacked with relentless ferocity. And worst of all, they seemed to have no end in sight. Wave after wave, they kept coming, wearing down even the strongest defenses. "Do what you can," Daniel finally replied, his tone calm but firm. "We'll hold them off as long as we can." Maria gave him a curt nod before turning away, shouting commands to the soldiers scattered around the outpost. Daniel watched her go, admiring her strength even as doubt gnawed at his mind. Was it worth it? All this fighting, all this sacrifice, was it really going to make a difference? Or were they just delaying the inevitable? As if answering his unspoken question, a deafening roar split the air. Everyone froze, their heads snapping, toward the source of the sound. In the distance, dozens of Krylos dropships descended from the sky, their sleek metallic forms gleaming under the pale sunlight. Each ship carried hundreds of troops, armed to the teeth and ready to kill. The sight sent a chill down Daniel's spine. This wasn't just another attack, it was an invasion. "Take your positions," Maria shouted, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. Soldiers scrambled to obey, taking cover behind whatever debris they could find. Weapons were checked, ammunition counted, and final prayers whispered. The air buzzed with nervous energy, a mix of fear and determination. No one spoke about the odds stacked against them. There was no point. They all knew the truth. Survival was unlikely. Daniel climbed onto a pile of rubble, raising his rifle. From this vantage point, he could see the entire battlefield, or what was left of it. The once bustling outpost was now a wasteland, littered with broken machinery and charred remains. Smoke rose from burning buildings, choking the air with its acrid scent. Somewhere in the chaos, a radio crackled faintly, broadcasting static-filled messages from command. Reinforcements were promised, but Daniel didn't believe it. Promises meant nothing when you were surrounded by death. The first wave of Krylos soldiers hit the ground running, their movements unnervingly smooth. They wore armor that shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the light in strange patterns. Their weapons fired beams of pure energy, capable of cutting through steel as easily as paper. One soldier aimed at Daniel, firing a shot that missed him by inches. He ducked instinctively, his heart pounding in his chest. Adrenaline surged through his veins, sharpening his senses. There was no time to think, only react. Around him, the battle erupted into full chaos. Lasers crisscrossed the air, lighting up the battlefield like a deadly fireworks display. Explosions rocked the ground, sending shards of debris flying in every direction. Soldiers screamed, some in pain, others in defiance. The sound was deafening, a cacophony of destruction that drowned out everything else. Daniel fired back, aiming carefully despite the chaos. He took down one enemy, then another, his training kicking in automatically. But for every Krylos soldier he killed, 3 more appeared to take their place. Maria fought beside him, her movements precise and efficient. She moved like a dancer, dodging enemy fire while delivering lethal blows with her weapon. Her focus was absolute, her expression unreadable. Daniel envied her composure. He wished he could shut off his emotions the way she did. But he couldn't. Every shot he fired, every life he took weighed on him. War wasn't glorious, it was ugly, brutal, and messy. And yet, here he was, doing it anyway. Time lost meaning as the battle raged on. Minutes stretched into hours or maybe seconds. It was impossible to tell. The world narrowed to the scope of Daniel's rifle, the flash of enemy weapons, the cries of his comrades. His arms ached from holding his gun, his legs burned from constant movement, but he pushed through the pain. Stopping wasn't an option, not yet. Then, out of nowhere, a new sound joined the fray, a deep rumbling noise that shook the very ground beneath their feet. At first, Daniel thought it was another explosion, but something about it felt different. It was rhythmic, almost mechanical. He turned his head, searching for the source, and saw it. A massive Krylos war machine lumbered into view, its bulk dwarfing everything around it. Its cannons glowed ominously, ready to unleash devastation. "No," Daniel whispered, his voice barely audible over the din. "Not this." The machine unleashed a barrage of fire, obliterating everything in its path. Soldiers dove for cover, but there was no escaping its wrath. Daniel watched in horror as the eastern perimeter collapsed entirely, leaving them exposed. Panic set in among the ranks, but Maria quickly regained control, shouting orders to regroup and hold the line. Still, the situation was dire. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. Victory seemed impossible. And yet, amidst the chaos, a strange thought crossed Daniel's mind. What if victory wasn't supposed to be easy? What if the greatest triumphs required the hardest sacrifices? He didn't have time to dwell on it. The battle demanded his full attention. But somewhere deep inside, a spark of hope flickered to life. Maybe, just maybe, they could still pull through. After all, humanity had faced impossible odds before, and somehow they always found a way to survive. For now, though, survival was enough. The battle raged on, and it felt like the universe itself was conspiring against them. The Krylos war machine continued its relentless assault, tearing through defenses that had taken days to build. Soldiers scrambled for cover as explosions rocked the ground, sending plumes of dirt and smoke into the air. Captain Daniel Carter crouched behind a pile of rubble, reloading his rifle with trembling hands. His mind raced, searching for any solution, any way to turn the tide. But nothing came. Every strategy he considered ended in failure. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. Lieutenant Maria Lopez wasn't faring much better. She darted between the remnants of the barricades, shouting orders to keep morale from crumbling entirely. Her voice was hoarse, her throat raw from yelling over the deafening roar of weapons fire. She had seen countless battles before, but this one felt different. It wasn't just the overwhelming odds or the terrifying efficiency of the Krylos forces. It was the sheer hopelessness that weighed on everyone. The soldiers under her command fought bravely, but their eyes betrayed their fear. They knew they were losing. Just as Daniel prepared to make what he assumed would be his final stand, something unexpected happened. A sharp whistle pierced the air, cutting through the chaos like a knife. Everyone froze, turning toward the source of the sound. Standing at the edge of the battlefield were two figures clad in dark, sleek armor. Their presence was unmistakable, calm, confident, and utterly fearless. One was a tall man with broad shoulders and an unreadable expression. The other was a woman, slightly shorter but equally imposing, her sharp gaze scanning the scene with clinical precision. "Who the hell are they?" Maria muttered under her breath, lowering her weapon slightly. Daniel didn't answer. He was too busy staring at the newcomers, trying to figure out if they were friend or foe. Before anyone could act, the man stepped forward, raising a hand, in a gesture that demanded silence. His voice, deep and commanding, echoed across the battlefield. "We're here to help," he said simply, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Stand down and let us do our job." The soldiers exchanged confused glances. Help? From where? And who exactly were these people? Daniel hesitated, unsure whether to trust them, but desperation won out over caution. If there was even the slightest chance they could turn things around, he had to take it. "Who are you?" Daniel finally asked, stepping forward cautiously. The man's lips curled into a faint smirk, though there was no warmth in it. "Sergeant Jake Monroe," he replied. "This is Corporal Emily Shaw." He gestured to the woman beside him, who gave a curt nod. "We're part of a special unit. You can call us the Ruthless Initiative." "The what?" Maria blurted out, her skepticism evident. Jake ignored her, focusing instead on the battlefield. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation, taking in every detail: the positions of the enemy, the state of the defenses, the condition of the soldiers. It was as if he could see the entire fight laid out like a map in his mind. "You're losing," Jake stated bluntly, his words hitting like a punch to the gut. "Badly. But we can fix that." Daniel frowned, his instincts telling him to be wary. There was something about Jake's demeanor that set him on edge. It wasn't just his confidence, it was the cold, calculating way he spoke, as if human lives were mere pieces on a chessboard. Still, Daniel couldn't deny the truth of his words. They were losing, and badly. Without reinforcements, or some kind of miracle, they wouldn't last another hour. "What's your plan?" Daniel asked, gripping his rifle tightly. Jake didn't hesitate. "First, we need to neutralize that war machine," he said, pointing toward the massive Krylos construct, still wreaking havoc. "It's the biggest threat. After that, we'll focus on breaking their lines. We'll hit hard, fast, and without mercy. No retreats, no second chances. That's how we win." Maria crossed her arms, glaring at Jake. "And what makes you think you can do all that? You're just two people." Jake turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We're not just two people. We're the best humanity has to offer. Now, are you going to stand there questioning us, or are you going to follow orders?" For a moment, Maria looked like she might argue further, but Daniel intervened. "Enough," he said firmly. "If they have a plan, we'll listen." "What do you need from us?" Jake nodded approvingly. "Good choice. First, gather your remaining troops. Organize them into small teams, 3 or 4 per group. We'll split up and flank the enemy. Hit them from multiple angles to create confusion. Once we've weakened their front line, Emily and I will take care of the war machine." Emily spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. "Stick close to us. Do exactly what we say when we say it. If you hesitate, you die. Understand?" The soldiers nodded, though many looked uneasy. There was something unsettling about the way Jake and Emily carried themselves, like they weren't just willing to risk their lives, but actively embraced death as part of the mission. Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that they were dealing with something far beyond ordinary soldiers. But right now, ordinary soldiers weren't enough to win this fight. As the team regrouped, Jake and Emily moved among the soldiers, issuing commands with ruthless efficiency. They didn't ask questions, didn't waste time debating tactics. Every instruction was clear, concise, and impossible to ignore. Even Maria found herself following their lead, though her jaw remained clenched in frustration. She didn't trust them, not completely, but she couldn't deny their effectiveness. "All right, listen up," Jake barked, his voice cutting through the tension. "This isn't just about survival anymore. This is about sending a message to the Krylos, to Earth, and to yourselves. Humanity doesn't give up. We don't back down, and we sure as hell don't lose. So get ready, because we're about to show these bastards what happens when you mess with us." The soldiers exchanged nervous glances but nodded in agreement. For the first time since the battle began, a flicker of hope ignited within them. It was fragile, fleeting, but it was there. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. With the plan in place, the group spread out, moving silently through the ruins of the outpost. The Krylos forces hadn't noticed them yet, too focused on obliterating the central defenses. Jake led one team while Emily took another, each heading toward a different flank. Daniel stayed with Jake, his rifle at the ready. As they crept closer to the enemy lines, he couldn't help but marvel at Jake's composure. The man radiated calm, his movements precise and deliberate. It was as if he thrived in chaos, feeding off the danger like some kind of predator. Finally, they reached their position. Jake raised a fist, signaling for everyone to stop. He scanned the area one last time before giving the order. "On my mark," he whispered, his voice barely audible. 3, 2, 1, go. The attack was swift and brutal. The small teams erupted from their hiding spots, unleashing a barrage of fire on the unsuspecting Krylos soldiers. Caught off guard, the aliens struggled to respond, their formations crumbling under the sudden assault. Chaos spread like wildfire, exactly as Jake had predicted. Meanwhile, Emily's team struck from the opposite side, creating even more confusion. The Krylos forces were caught in a deadly crossfire, unable to mount an effective counterattack. From his vantage point, Daniel watched in awe as the tide of the battle began to shift. The Ruthless initiative's strategy was working, better than he'd dared to hope. But the real test was still ahead. The war machine loomed in the distance, its cannons glowing ominously as it continued its relentless advance. Jake and Emily signaled for their teams to regroup, preparing for the final phase of the plan. "This is it," Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Once we take out that thing, the rest will fall apart. Stay sharp and don't let up. We finish this together." The soldiers nodded, determination replacing fear in their eyes. Whatever doubts they'd had about Jake and Emily were gone now. All that mattered was the mission. Together, they charged toward the war machine, ready to face whatever came next. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid smell of burning metal as Captain Daniel Carter and his team surged forward, following Jake Monroe's lead. The Krylos war machine loomed ahead, its massive form casting a shadow over the battlefield. The ground trembled with every step it took, its cannons firing indiscriminately at anything that moved. Soldiers scrambled for cover, their faces streaked with dirt and sweat. Despite the chaos, there was an undeniable sense of purpose in their movements now. For the first time since the battle began, they had a plan, and more importantly, they had hope. Jake moved like a ghost, weaving between debris and enemy fire with an eerie calm. He didn't flinch when a laser blast singed the edge of his armor, or when shrapnel sprayed dangerously close to his face. His focus was absolute, his mind calculating every move with precision. Emily wasn't far behind him, her sharp eyes scanning the battlefield for threats. She signaled to the soldiers around her, directing them to flank the machine from different angles. Her voice was steady, her commands clear. "Stay low, keep moving, don't stop." Daniel struggled to keep up, his legs burning with exhaustion. He had been fighting for hours and his body screamed for rest, but he pushed through the pain. Every step felt heavier than the last, yet he refused to slow down. These two strangers, Jake and Emily, had brought a strange kind of order to the madness, and Daniel wasn't about to let them down. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about them. Their confidence bordered on arrogance. Their methods were brutal, and their willingness to sacrifice lives without hesitation made his stomach churn. But right now, those same qualities were keeping everyone alive. As they closed in on the war machine, Jake turned to Daniel and shouted over the din, "We need to disable its legs first. If we can bring it down, we'll have a better shot at taking out its core." Without waiting for a response, he pointed to a group of soldiers nearby. "You three, create a diversion. Draw its fire away from us. Everyone else, follow me." The chosen soldiers exchanged nervous glances but nodded. Quickly, they knew what was being asked of them, a suicide mission, but they also knew that sacrifices had to be made if they wanted any chance of winning. With a deep breath, they charged toward the machine, firing wildly to draw its attention. The war machine's sensors locked onto them instantly, its cannons swiveling to unleash a devastating barrage. One soldier went down immediately, his body disintegrating under the force of the blast. The other two pressed on, shouting defiance even as death closed in. "Now!" Jake barked, sprinting toward the machine's massive legs. Emily followed closely, her weapon trained on the surrounding Krylos forces. Daniel and the remaining soldiers stayed close behind, dodging enemy fire as they approached the towering construct. The sound of explosions filled the air, drowning out everything else. Smoke billowed around them, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. Jake reached the base of the machine first, his movements quick and deliberate. He pulled a small device from his belt, a compact explosive charge, and placed it carefully against one of the machine's joints. "Cover me," he ordered, his voice sharp. Emily and the others opened fire, forcing the Krylos troops back, long enough for Jake to arm the charge. A loud beep signaled that it was ready. "Clear out," Jake yelled, diving behind a pile of rubble just as the charge detonated. The explosion rocked the ground, sending a shockwave rippling outward. The war machine staggered, its leg buckling under the damage. Sparks flew from its injured joint, and for a brief moment it seemed like the plan might actually work. But then the machine compensated, shifting its weight onto its remaining limbs. It wasn't down. Not yet. "We need another charge," Jake shouted, already moving toward the second leg. Emily tossed him another explosive, her expression grim. "Hurry," she said. "They're regrouping." Daniel watched as Jake repeated the process, placing the second charge with practiced efficiency. This time the explosion was louder, more violent. The war machine let out a deafening groan as its second leg collapsed beneath it. Its massive frame tilted precariously, teetering on the brink of collapse. For a moment, it looked like it might fall entirely, but then its stabilizers kicked in, locking it into place. It was still operational, still dangerous. "This isn't working," Maria said, her voice tinged with frustration. She fired a burst of shots at the machine, but her bullets bounced harmlessly off its armored surface. "We need a new plan." Jake ignored her, his gaze fixed on the machine's core, a pulsating orb of energy located near the center of its torso. "That's the weak point," he said, pointing it out to the others. "If we can hit it directly, we can take the whole thing down." "How do you suggest we do that?" Daniel asked, his tone skeptical. The core was heavily guarded, surrounded by layers of reinforced plating and swarms of Krylos drones. Getting close enough to destroy it seemed impossible. Jake smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Simple. Someone has to get inside." The words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. Everyone understood what he meant. Someone would have to climb the machine, navigate its defenses, and plant an explosive charge directly on the core. It was a suicide mission, one that no sane person would volunteer for. "I'll do it," Emily said suddenly, stepping forward. Her voice was calm, almost casual, as if she were volunteering for nothing more dangerous than a routine patrol. Jake turned to her, his expression unreadable. "No," he said firmly. "I'm going." Emily shook her head. "You're needed here. You're the tactician. Without you, this whole operation falls apart. I'm expendable." Jake hesitated, his jaw tightening. For a moment it looked like he might argue, but then he nodded reluctantly. Fine, but don't screw it up. Emily gave him a faint smile, before turning to the others. Cover me, and whatever you do, don't let them flank me. Without another word, she sprinted toward the machine, using its damaged legs as makeshift stairs. The Krylos forces noticed her immediately, opening fire with a barrage of lasers and projectiles. Emily dodged and weaved, her movements fluid and precise. She reached the first platform, pausing briefly to catch her breath before continuing upward. Each step brought her closer to the core, and closer to certain death. From below, Jake coordinated the defense, shouting orders to keep the Krylos forces occupied. Focus your fire on the drones, take out their reinforcements, don't let them overwhelm us. The soldiers obeyed, pouring everything they had into holding the line. Maria fought alongside them, her determination unwavering despite the odds. She glanced up occasionally, watching as Emily climbed higher and higher. Her heart pounded in her chest, fear and admiration warring within her. She didn't know much about Emily, but she couldn't deny her courage. Finally, Emily reached the core. She pulled the last explosive charge from her belt and attached it carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Whether from fear, exhaustion, or adrenaline, she couldn't tell. As soon as the charge was armed, she activated her comm link. Charge is set, get clear. Jake didn't hesitate. Fall back, now. The soldiers retreated as fast as they could, putting as much distance between themselves and the machine as possible. Emily stayed behind for a few seconds longer, ensuring the charge was secure. Then, with a final glance at the battlefield below, she began her descent. The countdown started, a steady beeping that echoed in her ears. 10 seconds, 9, 8. Each number felt like an eternity. She jumped the last few feet, landing hard on the ground and rolling to absorb the impact. Pain shot through her side, but she ignored it, scrambling to her feet and running toward the others. When the charge detonated, the explosion was massive. The war machine's core erupted in a blinding flash of light, sending chunks of metal flying in every direction. The ground shook violently, nearly knocking everyone off their feet. When the dust settled, all that remained of the once mighty construct was a smoldering wreck. For a moment, there was silence. Then, cheers erupted from the surviving soldiers. Against all odds, they had done it. The war machine was destroyed, and the Krylos forces were retreating, their ranks thrown into disarray. Victory wasn't complete, not yet, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it seemed possible. Jake stood amidst the wreckage, his expression unreadable. He didn't join in the celebration, didn't share in the relief that spread through the group. Instead, he turned to Daniel, his voice low and serious. This isn't over. We've bought ourselves some time, but the real fight is still ahead. Daniel nodded, understanding the weight of Jake's words. The battle might have been won, but the war was far from finished. And as he looked around at the battered survivors, he couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep going. How many more sacrifices would be required? How much more blood would be spilled? But for now, they lived to fight another day. And sometimes that was enough. The aftermath of the battle was a grim sight. The outpost, already battered before the war machine's arrival, now lay in ruins. Smoke curled into the sky from smoldering wreckage, and the air carried the metallic tang of blood and destruction. Soldiers moved slowly among the debris, their faces pale and drawn. Some tended to the wounded, applying bandages or administering painkillers with trembling hands. Others searched for survivors buried beneath collapsed structures, their calls echoing faintly in the stillness. The victory had come at a cost, one that weighed heavily on everyone. Captain Daniel Carter stood near what remained of the command center, his rifle slung over his shoulder. His uniform was torn and stained, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He stared at the ground, replaying the events of the past hours in his mind. They had won, yes, but it felt hollow. Too many lives had been lost, too much damage done. And then there were Jake and Emily, the enigmatic pair who had turned the tide of the battle. Their methods were brutal, their demeanor cold, and yet they had accomplished what no one else could. Daniel couldn't decide whether to admire them or fear them. Lieutenant Maria Lopez approached him, her steps deliberate but weary. She carried a clipboard, though most of its contents were singed beyond recognition. Her expression was tight, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Casualty report," she said, handing him the damaged clipboard. "We've lost 30 more since the last count." Daniel took it without looking, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "How many left?" 27, Maria replied quietly. Her voice cracked slightly, betraying the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. 27 out of 200. That's all we have left." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. 27 soldiers to hold an outpost that barely resembled a functional base anymore. It wasn't enough, not even close. But they didn't have a choice. Reinforcements were days away, assuming they arrived at all. Until then, these 27 would have to stand guard against whatever came next. Daniel clenched his fists, anger bubbling beneath the surface. How had it come to this? How had humanity allowed itself to be pushed to the brink? Maria sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "What do we do now, sir?" Daniel shook his head, unsure of the answer himself. "We regroup. We fortify what's left, and we hope the Krylos don't come back anytime soon." "They will," a voice interrupted. Both Daniel and Maria turned to see Emily Shaw standing nearby, her arms crossed over her chest. Her armor was scorched in places, but she showed no signs of injury. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene, taking in every detail with clinical precision. "They always come back." Jake Monroe appeared beside her moments later, his presence commanding even in silence. He nodded toward the distant tree line where the Krylos forces had retreated. "That attack was just a test, a probe. They'll analyze our tactics, find our weaknesses, and hit us harder next time." Daniel frowned, stepping forward. "And how do you know that?" Jake met his gaze unflinching. "Because that's what we do." The statement sent a chill down Daniel's spine. There was something unsettling about Jake's certainty, as if he spoke from experience. For the first time, Daniel wondered exactly who or what they were dealing with. Were Jake and Emily truly human or something else entirely? He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on the immediate problem. "Even if they come back stronger, we'll deal with it. We don't have another option." Emily tilted her head slightly, studying Daniel with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You're right. You don't have another option, but you also can't fight like this again." She gestured around at the broken defenses and exhausted soldiers. "Your people are stretched too thin. They're scared, tired, and demoralized. If the Krylos return tonight, you won't survive." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself. What could he say? She was right. They were hanging by a thread, and one wrong move would snap it completely. Instead, he asked the question that had been nagging at him since their arrival. "Who are you, really? Where did you come from?" For a moment, neither Jake nor Emily responded. Then Emily exchanged a glance with Jake, silently seeking permission. When he gave a slight nod, she turned back to Daniel. "We're part of a program called the Ruthless Initiative. It's classified. Most people don't even know it exists." "The Ruthless Initiative?" Maria echoed, raising an eyebrow. "Sounds dramatic." "It is," Emily admitted. "The program selects individuals who are willing or forced to become weapons. Enhanced bodies, sharpened minds, and zero hesitation in combat. We're trained to win no matter the cost." "And what happens if you fail?" Daniel asked, his tone sharper than intended. Emily's expression darkened. "Failure isn't an option. Not for us." Jake stepped closer, his voice low and steady. "The initiative doesn't recruit ordinary soldiers. We take prisoners, criminals, volunteers desperate enough to throw away their old lives. Some of us joined willingly. Others didn't have a choice. Either way, once you're in, there's no going back." Maria looked between them, her skepticism evident. "So you're telling me you're not just soldiers, you're super soldiers, enhanced killers?" Jake smirked faintly, though there was no humor in it. Call us what you want. All you need to know is that we get results. Daniel crossed, his arms, his mind racing. Everything they were saying sounded impossible, and yet he couldn't deny the evidence in front of him. Jake and Emily had single-handedly turned the tide of the battle, using strategies and skills far beyond anything he'd ever seen. If they really were products of some secret government program, it raised 1,000 questions. Who funded it? Who controlled it? And why hadn't anyone heard of it before now? But those questions would have to wait. Survival came first. All right, Daniel said finally. Let's assume everything you're saying is true. What do we do next? Jake pointed toward the tree line. We prepare for their return. Start digging trenches, reinforcing barriers, setting traps. Use the terrain to your advantage. Make them pay for every inch they take. And what about morale? Maria asked, glancing at the weary soldiers scattered across the outpost. These men and women are barely holding on as it is. How do we keep them fighting? Emily stepped forward, her voice softer than before. You remind them why they're here, why they chose to fight in the first place. Fear keeps people alive, but purpose makes them strong. Find theirs. Her words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Daniel nodded slowly, understanding what she meant. These soldiers weren't just fighting for themselves, they were fighting for humanity, for Earth, for the future. Somehow, he needed to reignite that spark within them, to remind them that their sacrifices mattered. As the group dispersed to begin preparations, Emily pulled Jake aside. Do you think they'll make it? She asked, her tone unusually vulnerable. Jake hesitated, his usual confidence wavering. I don't know. They're tough, but the Krylos aren't going to stop until they've wiped us out. It's only a matter of time. Emily frowned, staring at the ground. Sometimes I wonder if any of this is worth it. All the lives we've taken, all the sacrifices we've demanded. Is it really making a difference? Jake placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm but gentle. We don't get to choose whether it's worth it. Our job is to win. That's all. Emily nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, to trust that their actions served a greater purpose. But deep down, she knew the truth. Winning came at a price, and that price was paid in blood. Back at the outpost, Daniel addressed the remaining soldiers, his voice steady despite the weight of his emotions. Listen up, he called, drawing their attention. I'm not going to lie to you. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted, but we're still standing. And as long as we're standing, we fight. He paused, letting his words sink in. Around him, soldiers straightened slightly, their eyes meeting his with renewed determination. The Krylos think they've beaten us. They think we're weak, but they're wrong. We're stronger than they'll ever understand. Stronger because we have something to protect, something worth dying for. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group, followed by nods and murmurs of encouragement. Maria stepped forward, adding her voice to Daniel's. We've been knocked down before, but we always get back up. That's who we are. That's what makes us human. By the time the speech ended, the atmosphere had shifted. Gone was the despair that had clung to them like a shadow. In its place was resolve, a quiet, fierce determination to keep fighting, no matter the odds. As the soldiers returned to their tasks, Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Maybe, just maybe, they could hold on a little longer. But in the distance, beyond the tree line, unseen eyes watched and waited. The Krylos weren't finished. Not yet. And when they returned, the battle would be fiercer than ever. The night fell quickly, cloaking the outpost in darkness. The only sources of light came from the flickering flames of burning debris and the faint glow of portable lanterns scattered across the camp. Soldiers worked tirelessly to fortify what remained of their defenses, their movements illuminated by shadows that danced along the ground. Captain Daniel Carter moved among them, offering words of encouragement and lending a hand wherever needed. Despite the grim circumstances, there was a sense of purpose in the air, a quiet determination to hold the line no matter what. Lieutenant Maria Lopez stood near the edge of the tree line, her rifle slung over her shoulder as she scanned the horizon. Her sharp eyes caught every movement, real or imagined, but so far nothing had emerged from the darkness. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Krylos weren't reckless, they wouldn't attack blindly. When they came, it would be calculated, precise, and devastating. She tightened her grip on her weapon, her mind racing with scenarios and strategies. They had prepared as much as they could, but preparation wasn't the same as certainty. Behind her, Jake Monroe leaned against a crumbling wall, his arms crossed over his chest. His expression was unreadable, though his gaze never wavered from the tree line. Emily Shaw joined him moments later, her presence calm yet alert. Together they exuded an aura of quiet confidence, as if the chaos around them barely registered. For the soldiers working nearby, their composure was both reassuring and unnerving. How could anyone remain so calm in the face of such overwhelming odds? "We need to talk," Jake said suddenly, his voice low enough that only Emily could hear. She nodded, following him to a quieter corner of the outpost where they wouldn't be overheard. Once they were alone, Jake turned to her, his tone serious. "What's our next move?" Emily hesitated, glancing back at the soldiers. "We've done everything we can here. Reinforced the perimeter, set traps, organized patrols. But it's not enough. If the Krylos hit us again, we'll lose." Jake's jaw tightened, his frustration evident. "Then we take the fight to them." Emily raised an eyebrow, surprised by his suggestion. "You mean, go on the offensive?" "It's risky, but it's our best shot," Jake replied. "If we let them dictate the terms of engagement, we're dead. We need to disrupt their plans before they have a chance to execute them." Emily thought for a moment, weighing the risks. "Even if we manage to hit one of their forward positions, they'll retaliate. Hard. That's why we don't stop at one," Jake said, his voice firm. "We hit multiple targets, supply lines, communication hubs, anything that weakens their ability to fight. Keep them off balance long enough for reinforcements to arrive." Emily nodded slowly, understanding his logic. It was bold, reckless, even, but it might just work. "All right, but we'll need help. There's no way we can do this alone." "Agreed," Jake said. "We'll take Daniel and a small team with us, no more than 5 total. Any more, and we risk detection." They returned to the main area, finding Daniel speaking with Maria near the command center. Both looked exhausted, dark circles under their eyes betraying the toll of constant vigilance. When Jake approached, Daniel straightened slightly, his expression wary. "What is it now?" he asked, his tone guarded. "We're leaving," Jake said bluntly. "Infiltrating Krylos territory to disrupt their operations." Daniel blinked, caught off guard. "Leaving? Are you insane? We can barely defend ourselves here. What makes you think we can survive behind enemy lines?" "We don't have a choice," Jake replied. "If we stay here, we're sitting ducks. The Krylos will crush us when they're ready. This way, we take control of the situation." Maria stepped forward, her arms crossed. "And how exactly do you plan to pull that off? Sneak past their entire army without getting caught?" "We don't sneak," Jake said. "We strike fast, hard, and disappear before they know what hit them. Hit-and-run tactics. We'll target key locations, supply depots, communications relays, anything that slows them down." Daniel exchanged a glance with Maria, uncertainty written all over his face. "It's crazy," he admitted, "but it might actually work." "Good," Jake said, nodding. "We leave at dawn. Start picking your team." By morning, the group was assembled. Alongside Jake and Emily, Daniel had chosen Lieutenant Maria Lopez, Corporal Alex Turner, a young but skilled marksman, and Private Rachel Morgan, who excelled in stealth and reconnaissance. Each member carried minimal gear, prioritizing speed and mobility over firepower. Their mission was clear: infiltrate Krylos territory, sabotage critical targets, and return alive. Failure wasn't an option. As they moved out, the tension was palpable. The soldiers left behind watched silently, their faces etched with worry and hope. They knew the success of this mission rested entirely on the shoulders of these 5 individuals. If they failed, Epsilon 7 would fall. The journey through the wilderness was grueling. Thick forests gave way to rocky terrain, and the air grew, colder with each passing hour. The group moved in silence, communicating only through hand signals. Every step brought them closer to enemy territory, and the stakes grew higher with every mile. Late in the afternoon, they reached the outskirts of a Krylos supply depot. From their vantage point atop a hill, they could see rows of vehicles, crates, stacked high with supplies and patrols moving methodically between them. Guards manned watchtowers, their weapons trained on the surrounding area. Security was tight, but not impenetrable. "This is it," Jake whispered, studying the layout. "Carefully, our first target." "What's the plan?" Daniel asked, keeping his voice low. "We split into 2 teams," Jake explained. "Emily and I will create a distraction near the northern entrance. Draw their attention away from the main compound. You, Maria, and Alex plant explosives inside. Rachel stays hidden, ready to provide cover if things go south." Daniel nodded, understanding the strategy. "Let's make it quick." The team separated, moving into position. Jake and Emily crept toward the northern entrance, staying low to avoid detection. When they were close enough, Jake pulled out a small device, a remote-controlled drone equipped with smoke grenades. He activated it, sending the drone buzzing toward the guards. As soon as it reached its destination, it released a thick cloud of smoke, obscuring visibility. Alarms blared instantly, drawing dozens of Krylos soldiers toward the commotion. Meanwhile, Daniel, Maria, and Alex slipped into the compound unnoticed. Moving quickly, they planted charges on fuel tanks, ammunition crates, and key structural supports. Each explosive was timed to detonate simultaneously, ensuring maximum damage. As they finished, Rachel's voice crackled over their earpieces. "Enemy patrol heading your way. 2 minutes." "Copy that," Daniel replied. "Get ready to move." The 3 retraced their steps, rejoining Jake and Emily outside the compound. Together, they retreated to a safe distance, watching as the countdown ticked away. When the explosives detonated, the resulting explosion lit up the sky, sending shockwaves, rippling outward. Flames engulfed the depot, consuming everything in their path. The sound was deafening, a roar that echoed for miles. "Well, that got their attention," Emily said dryly, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Mission accomplished," Jake added. "Now let's get out of here." But their escape wasn't going to be easy. The destruction of the supply depot had triggered a massive response. Krylos reinforcements poured into the area, searching for the perpetrators. The group found themselves surrounded, cut off from their original route. They were forced to improvise, navigating through dense underbrush and narrow ravines to evade pursuit. Hours later, they finally stopped to regroup. Exhaustion weighed heavily on everyone, but there was no time to rest. They still had 2 more targets to hit before returning to Epsilon 7. Each success brought them closer to tipping the scales in humanity's favor, but each success also increased the danger. The Krylos wouldn't tolerate such brazen attacks. Retaliation was inevitable. As they pressed on, Daniel couldn't help but marvel at Jake and Emily's leadership. Their ruthlessness bordered on cold-blooded, but their effectiveness was undeniable. Under different circumstances, he might have questioned their morality. Now, all that mattered was survival, and if that meant embracing the darkness within, so be it. The night stretched endlessly, the stars above indifferent to the struggles below. Somewhere in the distance, the hum of Krylos engines grew louder, a reminder of the storm that awaited them. But for now they ran, fought and endured, for themselves, for Epsilon 7, and for the fragile hope of a future worth fighting for.